welcome you to this morning's event. Lipscomb's College of Education is certainly honored to host you for this morning's breakfast and conversation around charter schools. This is an event that from the inception has been intended to clarify, define, and describe what charters are, how they work, and also why communities around the nation and right here in Nashville seek and engage with charters as a public school option. We want you to leave understanding what charter schools are and how they operate and how they can ultimately transform a community. That being said, I do want to make sure that I highlight our featured speaker this morning. John Danner is here from California this morning, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Rocket Ship Education, the nation's leading network of K-5 charter schools, and proudly wears the title of the highest performing low-income elementary school network in the state of California. Now, I'm going to introduce Alan Coverstone, who many of you know. He is with Metro Nashville's newly created Office of Innovation and has worked with the charter school group out of the Metro office for a few years. So without further ado, Alan, thank you.
Candace asked me to come just talk a little bit about the history of charter schools. Charter school is an independently operated school with its own oversight board that enters into a contract relationship with a school district, and that contract relationship is based on performance. The charters that we have are contracted with us to provide exemplary education for students that they serve. And the future of those contracts depends on their ability to do so across the board. I think when I think about themes related to charter schools that what they can do at their best and what they do in a system where we're intentional about what we're trying to accomplish and where we're seeking to bring others on board to help us to provide for the needs of the students in our city is that they can bring several things. One, they can bring innovation, and you hear a lot about innovation, and since my office is titled Innovation, I felt like I should lead with innovation. But it really is important to think about the kinds of innovations that they can bring, because I think some of the charter school operators are changing the economic calculations and changing the human resource calculations and changing the relationship between technology and the delivery of education in ways that I think are important and, if anything, far overdue in education when you think about the ways that businesses and the economy function these days and the ways that education is delivered in a model that is perhaps a model that was developed for another day and time and which needs to be brought to the future. And so I think the opportunity to have flexibility to change that equation and to do so within a controlled space is one real opportunity that charter schools bring. And I think as you hear John talk about his organization, you'll begin to see a little bit what I mean, and we begin to think beyond even that in thinking about what schools can and should look like in the future. But more than that, I think charter schools bring committed people. But these are committed people who are committed to delivering a high-quality public education. And because of that commitment, I think that students have a real opportunity to benefit. A third thing is that charter schools bring new resources. There's just no question about that. Charter school organizations, as startup organizations, can tap into resource streams and areas for collecting resources and bringing them into public education that just wouldn't be available to public education without charter schools and without that innovative stream to bring them in. But lastly, and I think most importantly, absolutely most importantly, they bring results. And when the schools bring results, they can be expanded. And when the schools don't bring results, then they can be closed or restructured in ways that are a lot more direct and straightforward than ways that we have traditionally dealt with schools that haven't had strong results. It is at the end a trade between autonomy in how they operate and accountability, and that strict relationship is very important. In Nashville, we have 11 charter schools that we're privileged to work with. One of those schools is the state's first conversion school, the middle school at Cameron, which is being co-managed at the present, grades 6 through 8 by MMPS and grade 5 by Lead Public Schools. Of the schools that were eligible because of the data that they had in the list that was recently included with the AYP waiver submitted by the state, 40% of our portfolio was identified as reward schools, meaning that they were in the top 5% in schools in the state with regard to the growth that they brought for students. At the same time, 20% of our school portfolio was identified in priority status, and that gives us the impetus to change that equation in short order. We are about a couple of things things in Nashville's charter schools. We are about collaboration because we don't believe that any of these schools is an island, and we don't believe that the district is an island. We believe that we as a community have a responsibility to serve kids at a high level. And we want to work closely with, and do work closely with, anyone who wants to join us in that effort. We have been noted, and we're fortunate to be part of Gates recognized District Charter Collaboration Compact. And lastly, we're about high quality. Schools are really only judged by the quality of the outcomes that they provide for students and whether they provide high quality opportunities for students to have great lives. And as such, we're also a member of the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, whose mission is to promote charter schools of high quality, and I'm fortunate to serve on the board of that organization as well. I'll turn it back over and just say thank you all for being here, and thank you all for organizing.
Before I forget, I want to highlight that Alan and Dr. Register are very, very unusual in this country for folks that work within a school district. I work in cities and with school districts around the country, and very rarely do you see a group that's very proactive in the way that Alan and his team are, so that's a big deal. The other thing, since this really is all about people, is that Chris Barbick, who's now running the Achievement School District, he's not just kind of a player in the charter world. He started Yes Prep, which is one of the model charter school networks that we and many others who have high-performing schools think about when we designed ours. So I think Nashville and Tennessee is incredibly well set up for success right now, and I just want to talk a little bit about the perspective from my point of view. So since my story is kind of linked with Nashville, I think I'll tell it that way. I had started an internet company called Net Gravity in 1995, took it public, sold it, retired at age 31, and as you can imagine, retiring at age 31 is a bad idea. You get bored really quickly. I think I played golf for 6 weeks and then decided I probably needed to figure out something else to do with my life. And I was fortunate. I went to a Jesuit high school in San Jose, California, and the Jesuits, as any of you that know Jesuits, once you've made a little bit of money, they really are good at finding you. And they found me, and they said, how'd you like to help out your old high school? And I said, well, you educate upper middle class white men. That's not really a big cause for me. What else are you doing? And they said, well, you know, that's true, and we really do want to get back to our roots in education, and we're starting to do these middle schools around the country called nativity schools that serve inner city kids, tuition-free schools, and they were starting one in San Jose, so I got involved in that. And for any of you that have kind of dabbled in education as I had, actually getting in there and kind of getting a school up and running is an amazing, amazing process. For me, just watching the body language of that neighborhood in San Jose change, not just the students, but the entire neighborhood kind of feeling a sense of hope and a sense that they had something better, was really transformative. The other thing that was transformative to me about that process was that it was a tuition-free private school, which just don't do that. That's really, really difficult. It was the year 2000 in Silicon Valley, so it was possible to raise that kind of money, but it really was not going to be the scalable thing that we needed to fix public education. So that then brought me to Nashville. My wife was a law professor, became a law professor at Vanderbilt for several years, and while I was here, of course, Nashville doesn't do quite as much tech as Silicon Valley, so I thought, well, I've started down this education path, maybe I should keep going. And so I went to Peabody and got a master's degree, and then taught for 3 years, second grade at Glengarry School, Glengarry Elementary here in the district. And I learned something really, really important by doing that. When we talk about poverty in schools for low-income kids, I think we gloss over exactly the number of challenges that a lot of students face in just getting to school, being healthy for school, etc. And there's really no way around being a teacher for a while to understand the depth of those problems. But the other thing that I found that any of you that are in education know is every year there were 5 or 6 kids that were a long ways behind. You know, more than a year or two behind, and I always thought, gosh, how do I reach these kids? And my friends who were teachers would say, well, you've got to differentiate. And I said, well, what's that mean? And they said, well, you know, basically on the fly you have to figure out how to help these kids while you're teaching all the other kids and get everybody to the same place at the same time. And I'm an engineer by training, so my takeaway from that was, okay, we've just defined something that's completely impossible, so don't go down that path. So what I did in my own classroom was to create individualized learning plans for every student that was far below, and then give them tasks and lessons that they could do on their own with my oversight, but so that they were working at their developmental level. Because, you know, teaching two-digit addition when a child's still learning their numbers is just like, there's no differentiation you can do there. They've got to move their way up. And so that was a very interesting lesson in my own class, that was what worked. The second really formative thing that happened to me when I was here in Nashville is that I helped to get KIPP Academy Nashville going back in 2005. And if some of you were paying attention back then, it was early in the charter days here, you know, KIPP, like many KIPP schools around the country, within really the first 6 months, it was clear that this was going to be a very transformative school, a school that was going to get just amazing results and had an amazing culture. The other takeaway, though, that I had was, wow, the way KIPP has defined this is a really, really difficult and labor-intensive way to catch kids up. And really, to take nothing away from KIPP or some of the founders of our industry, the goal was to close the achievement gap basically at whatever cost. And often that entailed a somewhat brute force method, which was to extend the amount of time that students were getting in the classroom or in the school, which worked and worked very, very well. But as somebody coming from the business world, I thought, so we want to do thousands and thousands of schools in order to figure out how to close this achievement gap across the country. It's pretty hard to figure out how to do that and ask people to work for, you know, $50,000 a year, 100 hours a week. I mean, I couldn't figure out how that would work. And so when we sat down to design Rocket Ship in 2005, what I really had in my mind were those two experiences. One, in my classroom, how do you catch kids up that are so far behind? And two, how do you do a system, how do you build a system that really does scale and is really sustainable for not just the kids in your system, but the adults in your system? And that's really what Rocket Ship was created to do. So I think we're at a point in time now where the charter movement started 20 years ago. It was mostly mom and pop schools, single schools, and it kind of evolved in about 2000 to have networks like Yes Prep, like KIPP, who were doing multiple schools and able to close the achievement gap, which, by the way, I think all of us somewhat take for granted at this point, but it was completely against the traditional wisdom that you could do that. The traditional wisdom in 2000 was, look, these kids and these families are in this position and they're not going to get out of it. They don't have enough education, they don't have enough time, whatever. You know, this is just kind of the way society works. And these schools really completely blew up that myth. Having kids, you know, at KIPP Academy Nashville, for example, that are very, very higher performing than a lot of upper income kids in a city. And so that was a big deal. But the Rocket Ship challenge was, okay, how do you do that and do that with a lot of scale? And so I'll just talk about kind of three things we think about a lot at Rocket Ship. One is, how do you flip the achievement gap? So when I say flip the achievement gap, I mean that we always want our Rocketeers to outperform the upper income kids in the schools around them. Not the low income schools, but the upper income schools. So for example, in San Jose, we have 5 schools. One of them is right next to a very wealthy neighborhood. It's in a very low income neighborhood next to a wealthy one, and is currently outperforming the wealthy school by, in California, 50 API points. It's about half again as good as high on the proficiency, so 1.5 times the proficiency rate of that school. And you know, as you might expect, that means that a lot of people apply to your school from the wealthy neighborhood, which I always enjoy, and make sure that the superintendent understands what's going on there. Because if you can't outperform the upper income schools in your area and the parents vote with their feet, then there's probably something positive going on there. So we do have the highest performing school system in California for low income elementary kids. We outperform the upper income schools in California, and that's kind of one piece of what we want to be able to do, is flip the achievement gap. We do it three pretty basic ways. One is huge amount of parent engagement. We do home visits with every family. We have community meetings with 70 or 80% attendance. We have 30 hours of non-mandatory service that parents give to our schools. So really a lot of buy-in into the way our schools work. We do a ton of professional development, both with teachers and school leaders. Very structured program where every 8 weeks we collect data on where the students are at. We have academic deans at every school that sit down with each teacher and set 3 goals for that 8 weeks, what they're going to achieve, and then they use videotape, they use earbuds. So the earbud, people always enjoy the earbud thing. So you're a new teacher, you're trying to figure out your craft. Our academic dean will be in the back of the classroom. You'll have an earbud in your ear. The academic dean will have a microphone, and they'll ask you kind of on the fly in real time to make changes to your teaching. And the reason we do that is that all professional development and teaching is really behavior change. You teach for a reason. You're comfortable by doing that, and so if you want to change that, you've really got to literally get inside somebody's head to do that. And the amazing thing is that you would think people would think that's too invasive, that's terrible, but in fact most teachers, if you teach them a set of tools that allow them to better manage their class, get better results, they're incredibly happy. They feel very, very supported. So that's kind of the second piece. So you've got parent engagement, the way we develop teachers, and then the third thing that Rocketship's really known for is this change in the way that we think about individualizing education. So back to my classroom, when I was writing these individualized learning plans and having kids do separate activities, I always thought, well, why is it that a teacher has to figure that out for themselves? Why don't you design a school system that incorporates individualized learning into the basic school model? And so what we did was to create this thing we call Learning Lab. And Learning Lab is 2 hours every day. We have 6 hours of classroom time, 2 hours of Learning Lab. And in Learning Lab, everything that a kid does from the time they walk in that door is individualized. So they have an individualized learning plan. They'll sit down with a tutor or on a computer, and they'll work on lessons that are developmentally appropriate. So wherever they're at, if they're advanced, if they're just catching up, they'll have lessons that are appropriate. And the amazing thing about that is that from the beginning 5 years ago, 90% of our students exit the bottom quartile of performance every year and move into basic, proficient, or advanced within a year of coming to Rocketship. So it's not just theoretical. It really does work to focus on what each individual child needs. And the other advantage to that model is that when you have this learning lab, our learning lab's not actually staffed by certificated teachers. It's staffed by hourly workers, often with high school or some college education. They use scripted tutoring curriculum where when they're tutoring, they're working with the kids on the computer. But that really changes the economic model of the school. So we're doing two things there. We're differentiating the labor between what you need to do to be an effective classroom teacher and what you need to do to be able to oversee kids that are doing this individualized learning. And we're using technology in that setting as well to vastly reduce the cost of getting exactly the right lesson. And that nets out to about $500,000 of savings a year. And the way it works is that in any grade level, kindergarten, for example, if we've got 4 classrooms of kids, 1 classroom will be in Learning Lab at any one time. And then another kindergarten class will be there throughout the day. And what that means is instead of having 4 kindergarten teachers, you only need to have 3. Okay, so it's actually, the model is that simple. Throughout the day, different kids are with those 3 teachers, but you only need 3 instead of 4, so you save a quarter of your faculty. And that adds up to $500,000 a year, which you can imagine. I say to my friends in education, if somebody wrote you a check for $500,000 every year and said, improve your schools and make your system scalable, you can figure out how to do that. And we choose to do things like have academic deans, pay teachers better, things like that. But there are a lot of things you could do with that. So that individualization component is really a core piece of our model. The second thing we really focus on is how do you change the teaching profession. So back to that KIPP example, if it's great for the kids but tough for the teachers, that's not going to scale, that's not going to work. And so in addition to giving this kind of support with academic deans, removing a lot of the mundane things you would do in the classroom because they're being done in the learning lab side. The basic skills are in the learning lab side instead of the classroom now. We also pay more. So we started 5 years ago paying 20% above school district pay rates. We're moving to 1.5 times the salaries next year. And we're going to move to 2 times salaries in the next 3 years. So the point of that is, we do think teachers deserve to be making $100,000 to $120,000 a year. We think that once that happens, then teaching will start to be competitive from white-collar profession standpoint with lawyers, doctors, and others. And we do want to get the top quartile of the graduating classes from college every year, and we think that's an important part of it. So that's the second piece. And the third piece is you got to be able to do it at some scale. You got to do it at enough scale that we can talk to somebody like Alan or Chris and say, we'd like to be a big part of the success of Tennessee, not just an example, one school. We'd like to do 8 schools or something like that so that we can really show that it works. Because what we're trying to model is a school system that the rest of the school systems in the country could operate that would allow them to get these kind of results, reward their teachers this way, and have that kind of success. So that's what Rocket Ship is about. We are hoping to come to Tennessee over the next couple years and having lots of discussions about that. I would just say for all of you, this is an amazing time for Tennessee. From the time I was here 10 years ago until today, what a dramatic change that we've seen. And really, Tennessee is on the leading edge now of figuring out how to close the achievement gap for an entire state. And that's really something to be proud of, and hopefully something that all of you will get more and more involved in, because it's a unique opportunity in Tennessee. Thank you.
Derwin, I'm just going to have you, from your perspective, talk about what is the purpose of a charter school. From your perspective, what is the purpose of a charter school?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. For us, charter schools are the guinea pigs. We are the guinea pigs for our LEA, our local school district. What we do in the classroom and what is successful, we want to be scalable. And we want that not just to be scalable at the charter school level, but at the local district level. And what's not working, we want people to know so that they don't try it, or if they try it or they attempt it, they look at the things that didn't work for us and they work out the kinks. So for us, it's really serving as the pilot program on the guinea pig for the larger public sector.
And you kind of are walking both worlds in terms of a CMO and then a single operator. Sure. Very quickly share with the audience what the difference is between those two terms.
So a CMO is similar to a small school district. When we started about 4 years ago, we were a single grade, 6th grade class, 125 students, what we call scholars. And we realized that we were growing organically. We didn't want to just say we were going to start a CMO from off the bat. We, in fact, didn't even know we were looking to do an elementary school at the time. We said maybe we'll do a high school. But as we saw some early successes and we saw some things that were working, we said, you know what, this is something that we could take to scale. And about a year ago, we were working with a national funder and some other local funders to see what it would mean to grow to a larger capacity. And so we established a central office. In-house, we don't call it a CMO. We basically call ourselves a central support system. We don't believe that we're managing or dictating what our schools should do. We believe in autonomy, but we want to help direct the path in which they should go.
Great, thank you. And Kristen, I'm going to throw you another softball in terms of just the basic Charter 101. And if you can kind of talk, I mean, Alan spent a quick second or two just talking about the essence of the term charter and how that came about and what that means to a school district and really to a charter school. But can you talk a little bit more about the differences just from a structural standpoint, academic standpoint, that typically differentiate a charter school from a traditional school that's within the same district?
So there are some, I think, typical features within many charter organizations that look much different than your traditional counterparts. So, for example, and John referred to this earlier, we have an extended school day, an extended school year, and we have the autonomy to set a schedule that meets the needs of our students. So those structures certainly do impact what we're able to accomplish in a given day in a given school year. We also have a very different model, I would say, from your traditional public schools from the standpoint of parent engagement. We do a lot of work and leverage our resources in a much different way to ensure that all of our parents also have equitable access to the resources that we're providing, as well as access in a substantive, meaningful way to our curriculum so that they can also help their students. From an academic perspective, we designed our academic model. So for us at STEM Preps, we choose our own textbooks, as a practical example. We also provide teacher support in a different way. So our teachers, rather than having one planning period a day, another structural point, have 2.5 planning periods a day. So there's quite a few differences in those structural elements that I think also allow us to have a much different culture that's focused in a very steadfast way on student achievement.
Talk a little bit about just your funding. Where does your funding come from?
So charter schools are funded through public monies in the same way that our traditional counterparts are. We receive funding through the school district per pupil. So our revenue stream is in fact our enrollment. In addition, we also receive funding through Title I federal programs as well as special education. So it's very similar, it's the same as our traditional public school down the street. How we spend those dollars, however, is determined by us and our board.
Okay, great. Chris, cliff notes on ASD. What is the Achievement School District?
The ASDs, it's a simple concept. We've got schools that are in the bottom 5% in the state, and those schools are in the zip codes and in the communities you'd think they'd be in. 92% of the kids that attend those schools are coming from low-income backgrounds, and I think John said it perfectly in his talk. 10 years ago, there was a mindset that kids from low-income backgrounds couldn't achieve at the same level, and today, you just can't make that statement anymore. There's proof points all over the country. There's proof points right here in this city that kids from low-income backgrounds can achieve at the exact same level as kids from more affluent communities. What they don't have access to most of the time is they don't have access to the same type of opportunities and the same type of resources that kids get in great suburban schools and in great private schools. And when you give kids from any background access to the same types of opportunities and resources, they'll knock it out of the park at the exact same level. And so what we're trying to do at the ASD is to be able to, in business terms, we get to segment the market, right? We're focused on the bottom 5% of the schools. We're focused on kids that attend the bottom 5% of the schools, and everything we do, every decision we make, every resource allocation, every policy, every program can be focused on kids and schools in the bottom 5%. If you're a superintendent of, any other school district in the city or in the state, state or country, you've got to worry about all the schools. You've got to worry about kids going to good schools, bad schools, rich kids, poor kids. You know, we can be very focused on our approach to try and really turn the needle on these schools. And our goal is that in 5 years, we take schools that are in the bottom 5% and we put them in the top 25% in the state. And that would be double-digit gains every year for 5 years. And that's what we're going to set out to do. And if I could just say one thing about charters. So I think it's great that we're doing this panel. I think it's great that you guys are interested in charter schools. What I want to make sure that we walk out of this time with also is that charter schools does not mean it's a great school. Mm-hmm. So just because charter school slapped at the end of a school name does not mean it's a great school. It doesn't mean it's a bad school. So I think that as much as we cannot have this be charter school versus not a charter school or traditional school, what we need to be worried about as a community is, do we have good schools or not? Mm-hmm. And let's care less about how we get there. If we can agree on the what and provide as many options and choices as possible to families, I think that's what it is, as a city and as a state and as a country we need to be worried about, is not how do we get there, but are we in agreement that we need great schools. There's been a government monopoly that's been low performing, that has been one delivery system for this concept of public education for hundreds of years, and all charter schools are is another way to deliver a concept of public education. And it doesn't mean that's going to be good. It's only as good as the people and the programs and the processes and the systems behind those schools. Just like, you know, and you could say the exact same thing for traditional schools. So I worry that we sometimes get hung up on whether it's a charter school or not. We shouldn't care about that. What we should care about is it a great school or not? If it's great, let's do more of it. And if it's not, let's don't do it anymore.
So one of the things that, and I think Chris, you've really brought up a good, very good point, a very strong point, and those of us who are in the mix with the charter schools a lot, we do forget to always make the point that charter schools are schools within a district. They are simply an option and a choice, and I think that that's very important that you guys understand. As we have this discussion here with the panel, is that, you know, we could have this same panel talking about our comprehensive high schools and a panel talking about our magnet schools. So these are all choices within a district, and I think that's very, very important to keep in mind. And Chris, kind of going back and circling back with you, and you have touched on this with the ASD, part of your arsenal is to look at some of the schools across the state and make a determination of whether or not those schools, for whatever reason, should fall under operation of a charter school. Why is that? And why is a charter school part of your arsenal? And you've kind of touched on that, but if you can kind of reiterate on some of those points.
Sure. Well, I mean, right now the ASD is a startup. So, I mean, all of you guys in business that are in startup, you know, you can grow one of two ways, right? You can either try and build the company yourself, or you can go out and try and create partnerships with others. And so, you know, one of the reasons that we want to include charter schools in our portfolio is that we need to increase capacity quickly. There's 85 schools across the state that fall in the bottom 5%, and as a newly formed organization, I got here August 1st, we're not in a position right now to create a school district of 85 schools in 3 cities across the state with a team of 8 people, which is what we have right now. So if we're going to get to scale quickly and serve kids who are in the worst schools in the state, we have to be able to partner with organizations that are high performing, that have done this with similar backgrounds, so that we can, you know, get to the communities and schools and kids as quickly as we possibly can, while we're also scaling up our own capacity. And so, you know, being able to partner with an organization like Derwin's, who we did just authorize and who will be opening up a school in Memphis this coming fall. You know, this is a school it's a great school. They've gotten great results. SCORE just recognized them as one of the best middle schools in the state, and that's exactly, you know, from my perspective, the kind of organization and the kind of high-performing people that we want to partner with, because what they're doing at Power Center is a lot of hard work and a lot of good people. It's not magic, and we believe that we should give access to that same type of education to as many kids as we possibly can, as quickly as we can, with quality. And I think the with quality part is the tough part, and so for us to be able to find organizations that we can do that with, it allows us to get to that quality at a faster rate.
Thanks. So one of the things too, Chris, that you mentioned, which was part of a topic that I wanted to bring up, is understanding that charter schools, as with any school model, that you have some high flyers and you have some that are dogs that really probably should never have opened. They were approved, they opened, and eventually, hopefully, they were closed. And obviously, there are characteristics that separate out a high-quality school, no matter what the model is, and a low-quality school, again, no matter what that model is. Obviously, today we're talking about charter schools. And I'd love to hear from the panel as a whole about what they believe defines a high-quality school.
For me, that the answer is very simple. It's results. That our students are making substantial, very ambitious gains. So, for example, our goal is 2.5 years of growth in reading and math during the school year. So that, I would say, when we achieve that, that will be, our demonstration of those results.
If I could just add to that, for us, it's also results, of course, but also just a high demand. If you're not producing results, you don't have a high demand, but for us, that high demand is really determined by the community. We really established ourselves in a community a few years ago where people were leaving, businesses were closing down, and so for us, the answer, I actually came from a community development background, so the answer was not to build more houses, but to build a school where people would actually come back to that neighborhood. And so now that we're seeing that demand, that helps us to determine whether or not we're successful, but then also it's a no excuses mentality, as you see in a lot of high-performing charter schools and public schools or traditional schools or private schools. It's the idea that anybody could achieve at any or at the highest level if you give them the right tools, and that no excuses mentality, I think, is what really makes charters stand out.
And Chris, I don't know if you wanted to add just from a state's perspective.
I would say amen, amen. And it starts with any good organization. You got to have a good leader who's got a vision and who can articulate that vision clearly. You've got to have great people. And I think, we're sitting in a jewel right now in Lipscomb, and just the, Tennessee rates teacher effectiveness and ties it back to teacher preparation. And we're sitting in one of the best places in the state right now for teacher prep, and you just can't overemphasize how important that is. If you don't have great people in your, fill in the blank organization, I think technology is part of it, but all technology is if you put the right tool in the right hands of a good teacher, it makes them better. If you don't have the fundamental raw materials in the classroom of a good teacher to begin with, you can surround them with as much stuff as you want that's going to maybe make them incrementally better. You got to have a great teacher. And so I think, if you look at great schools, it's a great leader who attracts and supports and develops great teachers, and then uses resources in a smart way. I mean, I hope that another thing you guys walk with is that none of this is rocket science. I mean, I think in education we jargon it to death and make it overly complicated. It's the same thing that makes any good organization work. You get a good leader, you get good people, you have a clear vision, you set goals, you hold people accountable, you either get it done or you don't, and if you don't, you provide support to a point, you say goodbye, and you move on down the road and you do the right thing. And it's what every single one of you guys probably have done from the minute you stepped out of college into your first job up until now. And in education, for some reason, this is like it's like the earth crashing into the sun when you start talking about these things, and it shouldn't be. I mean, it's simple stuff. We make it overly complicated because I think the one thing that gets introduced into education more than any other profession is politics. And when you start introducing politics into all of this, it makes it way more complicated, and we start thinking way more about the adults and how people feel than we do about whether or not we're getting results for kids, and that's what really mucks this stuff up. But if you peel all that stuff away, it's the same sorts of things that make any one of your businesses effective and successful. And when you have businesses that don't work, it's probably for the same reasons that you're seeing failing schools. You don't have capacity, it's under-resourced, or you don't have the right leadership and people working in the organization. And I would say schools and school districts are no different than that.
Great, thanks. And that's it. It's a great segue into, you mentioned the political aspect, the political piece of it. So, and John touched on this also, which, Tennessee has had a very interesting approach to its charter school laws, and has seen obviously dramatic change in its law coming out of the necessary legislation tied to the Race to the Top application that the state sent. Chris, real quick, what is the current charter law?
It's open enrollment, which it wasn't before. It was, I mean, Tennessee was known for one of the worst charter laws in the country for a long time. So the fact that it's changed as much as it has is a tribute to leadership across the state. It's open enrollment, and now there's multiple authorizers. So up until Race to the Top, the only way you could get a charter was through the local district. Now the state through the ASD can authorize. Our ability to authorize is limited to just the schools in the bottom 5%. But that's kind of the law, and I think there's actually the fact that the law wasn't good at first, I think was not a bad thing, because you have places like Arizona that has 500 charter schools, and a lot of them aren't any good. So it can turn a little bit into the wild, wild west, which you don't want. And I think that the fact that it was difficult in the beginning to get a charter really helped make sure the quality was good. Credo, who we worked with through the ASD, just released some effect size data on the charters across the state, and there's a lot. The bulk of the charter schools in Tennessee are strong, and definitely strong compared to a national average. And I think part of that was it was difficult in the beginning to get a charter, so you really kind of weeded out folks that probably shouldn't have been in the game to begin with. But I think quality a lot of times depends on the authorizer. If you have a good authorizer with a high bar who's making sure that good people are running schools, then the chances are that you're going to get the right people doing this work for the right reasons, and that's what all of us want.
Kristen and Darwin, is this law a complete law from your perspective?
As Chris mentioned, it's just great that there's open enrollment. When we first started, there was a small population that we could attract. There was a small population that we could serve. But now that it's open, that's helped us. But there's still some issues around facilities and the amount of funding that goes towards facilities that make it difficult for charters to operate. And as Chris mentioned, you all are business leaders, that you have your own businesses or work for businesses. And if you can't pay the rent, if you don't have the money to turn the lights on, it makes it difficult to pay your employees. It makes it difficult for people to feel comfortable where they are, and we really believe in being as lean as possible with the amount of money that we operate with, but that still makes it very difficult when you get lean funding that doesn't go towards facilities. And so as it was mentioned, we pretty much get the same amount of money per pupil for our scholars, but the facilities amount is cut short. And so, I think that's something that stands out to me, that if we could change that, you could have a lot, your charter schools could be more effective when you're not trying to skim dollars from here or there, pay rob Peter to pay Paul, and you could actually pay for the facilities that you need.
I really want to just kind of talk about how the issue of where can I open my school will either make or break, slow or facilitate growth of charter schools. But just kind of, I want to put that out there just for you guys to comment on.
There's no shortage of vacant retail industrial spaces in the city or in certain neighborhoods where great schools are needed. The build out of those facilities is incredibly expensive, and it's just not feasible for a startup organization to take on that cost. The square footage we need in the first year looks very different from what we need when we have 400 students. So then you balance, a temporary location and what that means. So it's, facilities is something from a grassroots community building perspective. It's something we think about. From a fiscal perspective, it's something we think about. We still are, in a facility right now that works for us right now, but, is not going to be our long-term solution.
For us, there are disadvantages and advantages to not having our, equitable facilities to choose from. What's interesting is that you can either go to a community because there's a facility that exists, or you can go to a community because there's a need in that community. You're lucky if you find both. And so for us, it became difficult. When we first started, we knew exactly what community we wanted to be in. We had a partnership with one of the local churches, and so, they had a children's building that they used only on Sundays and on the evenings. So it was perfect for us. But as Kristen mentioned, it was, we would outgrow that space in 2 or 3 years. And so we knew that wasn't going to be a permanent home. Where there was an advantage to that, and, we all know the saying, necessity is the mother of invention, we had to find a space that, we had to be creative with the way we financed that space. And so we actually drove up and down a neighborhood in Memphis. I don't know if you're familiar with this Winchester corridor, which is like a highway, but it's really a street. It's interesting. And a lot of businesses up and down that street were leaving, and so a local architect and I drove up and down that community, saw abandoned Circuit Cities, Kmart's, Kroger's, you name it, it was abandoned. And we looked at those facilities, and they were at an okay cost, but when you compare it to what the district would charge us at the time, it actually worked out to be better to take over one of those facilities and to retrofit it than to actually lease a district space. And so why lease and throw away that money when you could actually retrofit a space and own it? And so eventually we came across this old abandoned apartment complex, and as I told you, I'm a former community development person, and so this organization outside of California wanted to sell that property to us when I first came on board that organization, and we weren't interested. But I remember that property was about 24 acres of blighted land, and to me, I saw the advantage of not just building a school, but an entire community where the school would anchor it. Because for us, we're very much a community-based school, and we knew we wanted to stay in that community. And so what we did is we actually acquired that space. I'm just making a very long story short, but we acquired that space for about $1.6 million. $1 million of that was a taxable write-off. $400,000 went to their back taxes that they owed the city and county anyway, and it ended up being a $200,000 cash deal. Then we went to a group out of Boston that owned another 18 acres of undeveloped land that was zoned residential in the middle of a recession, and it was landlocked by that property, and they sold us that property for $180,000. So now we're all in for $180,000 for 43 acres of blighted property that the Department of Housing and Urban Development decided they were going to demo for us, and so now we're able to build our school at a much lower cost than if we were going to lease a space from the district. And not only do we have a school, but we'll have a performing arts center, a wellness center, commercial, residential space, and this is all really through partnerships and community building. And what's interesting about the Performing Arts Center is, again, we have to be creative with the money that we have. So we technically could not afford to build a school that was big enough to have an auditorium and a gym. So what we did is we applied for FEMA funding, and we got money for a storm shelter. So that that building is really a tornado safe space, but when there's not a tornado, it's a Performing Arts Center. And then the Wellness Center is actually another partnership where we don't have space for a gym, but we could actually use that space when our scholars need it, and when they're not using it, guess what? The community could use it. And so why I say there are advantages is because if we were just given a facility and we were just given money for a facility, especially as a startup, we would have taken that money, we would have run with it, and we probably would have built a nice building with it, but we would not have really kept the community first and foremost. And so as we drive up and down neighborhoods, that's our green lighting process. What does the community need? And then where are the facilities, and how can we retrofit them?
Hey, Chris, obviously we have heard a couple of different approaches that were taken around facilities, and we have organizations such as the Tennessee Charter School Incubator that is focused on statewide charter school growth here. So we have a variety of different, and the incubator is obviously looking at facilities as well. How does the state also help kind of crack the nut around facilities?
Well, first, that's why charter schools are important, because having someone like this in the education field, Derwin, that's just a perfect example of why this is so important. I mean, how many superintendents could sit here and walk you through what he just did in the country? I'd say I could probably count them on two hands. So the fact that charter schools are attracting, a caliber of person that would never have been interested in public education were it not for this pathway is I hope that you guys just recognize how important that is. From a state perspective, I guess really what we're doing is when we go in as the ASD, we take the building too. We'll take the building out of local control and we'll give it to, someone like Derwin if it's a charter school, or we'll run the building ourselves. So, we hopefully, and part of the value proposition that we want to give to high quality operators is you don't have to spend all of your time doing what these guys are talking about, because every minute they were spending doing that, they weren't worrying about the quality of the education the kids were getting at the school, and that's not a good thing. And they probably had people on their staff that were doing that. But the point is that let's take all of that stuff off the table. If a school is in the bottom 5%, and schools that we're talking about have been in the bottom 5% in some cases for decades, you know what? The district's lost the right to be able to have that building anymore, because at the end of the day, the district doesn't own that building. You guys own that building because you guys paid for it as taxpayers. So we believe that it's important to give another group an opportunity to serve those kids in that building, and they shouldn't have to pay anything for that. That building's already been paid for, you paid for it, and the organization, the district that was operating that building has failed that community for years. So you know what? We're going to give that space to somebody else and let them, do a better job. And so I think what we can do is hopefully make it easier for good operators to get off the ground and to give them a space that that they can operate from without spending 90% of their time worrying about fire codes and fire marshals and building codes.
Thanks. How does one get past this us them and get to the we? Because the we is the children, and the we is the strength of the community. I want to just kind of hear from the two of you, and then see if Chris has anything he would like to add.
Well, I think as we were putting together the charter application, that's something that we thought very much about from a design perspective. And actually, I wrote on, I think, the second page of the charter that we see ourselves as one tool that our community can use to reform education. And so we will gladly share anything and everything. What does that look like in practice? We work very closely with several traditional public schools in our neighborhood, and have written grants together and have come together around some curricular planning, and with the Gates-supported compact are looking forward to more collaborations among school leaders and teachers in the spring. So I think it's definitely a mindset shift, and I think that at least for my colleagues who have come into this work at about the same time I have, all of us new kids on the block, we have certainly been approaching this work with a collaborative mindset, and I think you just have to, because at the end of the day, I care equally as much about what's happening with this student next door in this apartment building who doesn't go to our school, but who very much belongs to us and the work that we do.
What she said, just really partnering with just the local schools. Before we even opened our doors, we went to all the public schools, the traditional public schools in our neighborhood, the private schools. We met with them. We said, hey, we're coming in as a partner. We're not the saviors. We actually don't have the answer. We know that for sure because we haven't even opened yet. But if we do come up with some answers, we want to share them with you, and we also want to visit your school. We want to, what's interesting is that the students, especially when when we first came on board, the charter law was different. So we were pulling a lot of students directly from our neighborhood because one of the neighborhood schools was failing. And so what was interesting is that the principal of our school and the principal of their, we all knew the same students, our same scholars, and we knew their family stories. We understood more so, and so it's better for us to communicate the issues or what have you with the scholars instead of operating in our own silos and having to start from square one whenever we were introduced to a new scholar. But then also we have an open book, so even just what I share with you, nothing is private. It's not we did it so you can't. The idea is that we did it so you can. And so, we really pride ourselves again off of being lean and operating off of public revenue. In fact, nothing of what I just mentioned came from private foundations. Of course, we still believe that private foundations are very important to the larger movement. And so if we get funding from a private foundation, it's not so that it's only for us. It's to pilot a program that other people can see and other people can scale as well. But we want to make sure that a lot of what we're doing is just a creative use of public funding that's, as Chris, mentioned, or at least what I understood it to be, has been wasted for hundreds of years with the policies that have already existed in education. Part of how we do this is what we're doing right now, which is educating you guys as to what all this means, right? So that's step one. Step two is, I think, I'm going to just let me philosophize for 10 seconds. So public education is not a system, right? So I think that the language is important. Public education is a concept. It's the idea that in order for our democracy to work, our citizenry needs to be educated. We've had a system that's delivered this concept of public education for years and years and years and years. And for some kids, it's worked really well. For some kids, it hasn't. Charter schools are another system to deliver the concept of public education. It's still a public school. It's publicly funded. So when we say things like, you're taking our resources away, I mean, they're not
the district's resources, right? They're your resources as taxpayers, and that money should follow the kid, okay? The money belongs to the family, not to the district. Just like in business, they're not your customers. You don't own those customers. Those customers have chosen to work with you, and that's a privilege, right? And you work every day to make sure that those customers continue to work for you. And when they leave, it's not the competition's fault. You probably look at what you did wrong to find out why they left, right? So I think we have to think about a different mindset in public education. So when we open up a charter school, we're not taking resources away from anybody. That family's making a choice to go to another school because the school in their neighborhood stinks. You know what? And if they can walk down the street and pick out which soda they want, or what toilet paper they're going to use, or what deodorant they're going to use, they sure as hell should be able to pick out what public education they're going to use. And it's not anyone's dollars except the family making that decision. So we need to think about public education not as a system, but as an idea. And the more systems, the better. I think about NACC collaboration. It should be co-opetition. We should be competing for the kid. That we should be competing for results. And every time we find something that works, it's our responsibility to share that across systems. And if we think about it as co-opetition, right, and not, I think I like a little bit edgier than collaboration, but then everybody wins. You know what? And if there's 10 systems or 10 networks in the city all doing a great job, that's great. That's a win-win for everybody. And I just think we need to be careful about the language, and we need to educate you guys so that you can go out in the community and have these same types of conversations.
Thank you. I think we are going to transition into questions from the audience, and I see that there is a mic here.
This probably goes to all three of you. Who or what judges the charter school as to its meeting its standards?
It's the LEA, so in this case, it's the local school district, MNPS for us. We have to show results across all aspects of our organization, and if we don't perform, then we close. I think that's highly desirable. I think it's also highly responsible, and I think it's something that we should apply uniformly across all schools, public, private, charter, magnet, what have you.
I want to know why you cannot operate a charter in some of the schools, the low-performing schools that are not full.
We actually do have that case in point with East Prep over in East Nashville side, but why we probably don't have more is that it's actually preference. A school district is not required to share their facilities. Preference.
Said the buildings don't belong to the district; they belong to the taxpayers.
Yeah, and so I know, isn't that the interesting part of it? And that's the way the law is stated. It's not a requirement of the LEA. And so I can say, so in East Prep's situation, they developed a relationship with the principal of that school that they're in. It's actually Isaac Litton, and right now they're in Dalewood. And because they built that relationship, that principal said, yeah, I don't mind sharing this building with this charter school as it grows. Is there any I don't know, Chris, if you want to touch on anything?
I mean, it's a great question. Mm-hmm. Why don't we? So I think you guys are not only taxpayers, you're voters, right? So I think, you guys can put that pressure on the system. 5 phone calls is like a revolution to a school board member. And if they get 10, the earth is crashing into the sun. So, if you pick up the phone, call. I mean, that's a policy issue. And the way you change policy is you get the people in charge of the policy to fix it. In this case, it's the school board. And if they don't, fix the policies that you want, then vote somebody else in their seat.
How have you, as far as to develop the community from the inside out, by looking at the product of the respect that the students carry, the respect that they have for their education, the respect that they have for their peers, and the opportunities that they have? How do you all incorporate that type of development in your academic structure.
The high school I went to, we lived by the Ephebic Oath, which is leave your city greater than you found it. And so that's something that we implemented in our own school. And so, for us, humanitarianism is a big part of what we do. So, of course, we're creating business leaders, but we don't, we do a complete injustice if we created business leaders who weren't community engaged. And so, for instance, we have a savings, we have a partnership with SunTrust Bank where every scholar has a savings account and they save their own money. But it's not about, saving your own money so that you can build your own wealth, but it's about how do you give it back. And so a couple of years ago, scholars gave away about $1,000 or $1,500 of their own money to the Haiti relief effort as a part of knowing how to give back. So, everything that we do is tied into humanitarianism, community service, and even the way you dress, right? You want to, make sure that we're all on an equal playing field. And so some of the pushback that we had from some of our teachers who really want to, make a change was that, I don't feel like I'm serving the kids who really need me, because they saw these scholars in blazers and ties, and they thought that these scholars were coming from, well-to-do neighborhoods. And we said, wait a second, this is just a uniform, right? But just the fact that this teacher saw them as someone who was like them made the difference. And so for us, it's character education. We build that in every single morning. We have our power up hour with our power up time with our scholars. It's the humanitarianism side, but it's also just knowing how to leave your city greater than you found it.
Thank you. And if everyone can join me in just thanking the panel